Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So tonight we are going to discuss the second aspect, or the second night we're going to dedicate to regulating our emotions. We're going to do it a little bit differently than last time. We'll define some terms. We'll talk about some of the advantages of doing it, and then we'll do a couple of exercises. The last exercise we did last time, we kind of rushed it a little bit. And if anybody wants to go back to it, I'm happy to do that as well, okay? All right, so that's fine, okay. Let's go ahead and start. I've got to find my notes, of course. Okay, I have the go-ahead from those who are trying to get in and can't. Okay. Isn't that kind of them? Very super kind. Okay. So let's first define emotional regulation. Yeah, we did talk about it last week, but let's first define it. Emotional, this comes from somebody by the name of Gross. His last name is et al. Just kidding. I know, it's not really et al. I know, Myrna, I know, I'm just joking. Okay. All right. I think that Myrna and Barry particularly enjoyed that one. All right, that was a good joke. I gotta do that one again. Okay.
I thought it was funny.
Okay, all right. They're the two academics, you know. So, not the only two bright people. Everyone here is super bright, but they're the two who are in academia, or maybe emeritus academia, Barry, right? But you're still writing. Barry, did I ever tell you that story about my brother-in-law? They had my in-laws were very, very good friends with the Kerzners. Rabbi Kerzner was the rabbi in a shul in Clanton Park, which is in Toronto. And so I guess they daven mincha there, which is in a different neighborhood than where my in-laws live. But I guess they daven mincha marv there one night. And my brother-in-law comes home and he says to my father and goes, "I never knew Rabbi Kerzner's middle name was Emeritus," because he was, of course, retired. He was Rabbi Emeritus. Okay, what is emotional regulation? Emotional regulation refers to the process by which individuals influence which emotions they have, when they have them, and how they experience and express their feelings. Emotional regulation can be automatic or controlled, conscious or unconscious. It may have effects at one or more points in the emotion-producing process. How's that for an annoying academic definition? You like that? Okay. But the first part of it, I think, is very useful, which is that it's the process by which we, as individuals, influence the emotions that we have, how we experience them, and how we express them. And I think that first part of it is certainly very, very useful. So emotional regulation encompasses both positive and negative feelings, along with how we can strengthen them, use them, and control them. Sometimes, obviously, actions are certainly going to be related to emotions. Do you remember we talked about the triangle of ABC, where A at the top of the triangle stands for affect, B at the bottom of one side of the triangle stands for behavior, and C stands for cognition. There's a triangle or a circle. It's ABC. And affect influences behavior. It influences cognition. Cognition influences behavior. It influences affect, the way that you feel. And of course, that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in. It's the way that you think and the way that you act that's going to impact the way that you feel. Okay. So therefore, emotional regulation is going to involve different components. Emotions will trigger actions. So therefore, initiating actions triggered by emotions. Emotions will, at times, we can inhibit the actions that are triggered by the emotions. And number three, and this is kind of in between, is we can modulate our responses, which are triggered by emotions. In other words, everybody has triggers. We all have triggers. I was triggered this afternoon. I've been playing a lot of baseball lately. Talk to my right shoulder. If you ever see a blue package here, it's because I'm icing my shoulder, okay? And there's this one guy who does not stop talking the entire game. He just does it for fun, and he knows he's going to get reactions out of people. And at one point, he yells out, I think I was at bat, and I foul tipped the ball, and the catcher caught it, but it was on the first strike. So those of you that know baseball know it doesn't mean anything. It's just strike one. If that were to be strike three, it would be a strikeout. If it was a foul ball that was not caught by the catcher, so then it wouldn't be a strikeout. Okay. So he yells, "You're out!" after strike one, where the foul tip was caught by the catcher. And he triggered me, and I had something to say to him, and he just laughed because he knew he was just doing it on purpose. He's been trying to push my buttons for the last 3 months, and he finally got to me a little bit. No big deal. It's all in the fun of the game and of the sport, and it's a bunch of guys having a good time. But we all have triggers, and the more we are aware of what our triggers are, the more we can choose to respond to those triggers rather than react to them. If you're not sure what your triggers are and you have teenage children, just ask them. Okay? If you're not sure what your triggers are, ask your teenage children what your triggers are. I guarantee they can tell you what your triggers are. Ask your spouse what your triggers are. I guarantee you he or she knows what your triggers are. Okay? Ask your best friend if you have any triggers. I can tell you that for some people in the shul, politics is a trigger. Oh, I mean, I can very easily, well, not me, I would never, chas v'shalom, never knowingly, God forbid, trigger anybody in the shul for anything, right? But I have triggered people in the past. There was one evening where I sent out a picture of the president, he who must not be named, according to some people in our shul, so I won't name him, but the current president of the United States of America, and he was holding up a booklet, and the booklet said, and he opened it, and it said in Hebrew, Erev Tafshilin. I hate to tell you this, but that person was seriously triggered, and I had to do some damage control. We all have triggers, okay? And if you're not sure what they are, like I said, ask your best friends, ask your spouse, ask your teenage children. Knowing what your triggers are, I know what my triggers are in the classroom. I know what bugs me. I know that chutzpah bugs me, and I know that apathy bugs me. Questions which are not good questions don't bother me because the kids are trying. But I can tell you in the classroom what triggers me, no question. By knowing what triggers me, I don't have to react to the trigger. Okay. You know, it's interesting. Last Sunday, a couple Sundays ago, someone in the shul invited me to go shooting. Did you know, and this is an amazing thing about California, even though we're a democratic state, did you know that if you want to go to a shooting range, all you need is one thing, money. That's it. You don't even need to show ID to go to a shooting range. If you bring a gun and your own bullets, all you've got to do is pay for the schus, for the merit, for the right to use their shooting range. That's it. Doesn't that comfort you? Doesn't that make you feel comfortable? It's not Texas, it's California, right? Amazing. I'm not talking about gun control. I'm just saying something simple. If you own a gun, which apparently all you need to do is take a test, pay $25, and you can get a license for a gun. Not to carry concealed or anything, but it's apparently very easy. They ask you very important questions like, when holding a gun, should you A, point at the person next to you, or B, point at the ground? Okay, those are the types of questions that are on the test. I haven't had a chance to take it yet, but I'm thinking about it. Anyways, yeah, you can go to a gun shop in Burbank. Guess what the shop is called? Guns and Ammo. Okay, very original. You can go to the gun shop in Burbank, and you could very easily walk in there and say, hey, and you have to there you'll have to show a driver's license, okay? And you show ID, and you simply say, hey, I really I want to get a license. You take a test, you pass it, you can buy a gun. Now you have to wait 10 days before you get it. That's a very smart law. There's actually a very similar law in halacha called the get mikusher, which is that in certain places, kohanim, who are known to be very angry people, it's related to the parsha with Pinchas a little bit, but we're known to be very angry people. So in order for them to divorce their wives, because once a Kohen divorces his wife, he can't take her back. So the people that were organizing the get had to write what's called the get mikushar, which is a very complicated way of folding the get and tying knots in the get. And it took all day to do it. And they were hoping that by the time they finished writing the get, the Kohen would calm down and come to his senses and not divorce his wife. Okay, this was in the times of the Gemara. That's why you have a 10-day waiting period between the time that you buy the gun and you can actually pick it up. It's a good law. That law makes a lot of sense. Okay. All you have to do is go to the shooting range. And yeah, if you want to buy ammunition there, you do have to show your license. They don't do a background check. They give it to you right away. But there you have to show a license. Now, why am I bringing that up? Because the fellow that I went with had a, I think it was a 387 Magnum or a 45. It was, I don't know, some sort, and it was a revolver. And there's two ways to shoot the revolver. You could either cock the trigger back, not the trigger, I don't even know what you call it. There's a, maybe one of you knows what it's called, but there's a piece behind the gun. So you pull that back, and then you aim the hammer. It's called the hammer, right? Thanks, Marina. So you pull back the hammer, then you aim, and then you shoot. And even though the gun is a big gun and the bullet's a large bullet and it has a kick, but it's a much easier to aim that way. Or you could actually, using the trigger, you can actually pull harder on the trigger. You can pull harder on the trigger, and it will pull the hammer back for you. But it's much harder to aim that way. It's much harder to control. So it's more of an automatic that way. You just keep pulling the trigger and you keep shooting, or you can pull it back and then shoot. Now, why do I bring that up? It's a bit of a tangent here, because some triggers are hard to pull and some triggers are soft to pull. So we all have our triggers, but our goal is to leave some space between the trigger and the reaction to make it harder for our trigger to be pushed. Okay? That's our goal. And modulating our responses that are triggered by our emotions certainly is going to be the best way to make the most of this process that we call regulating our emotions. And what emotional regulation does for us is it modifies. It helps us filter important pieces of information. It helps us attend to that which is important in a way that doesn't evoke stress or fear. And there's definitely studies show, I have a friend, he said, whenever he quotes a statistic, he likes to quote statistics because then he thinks that what he's saying has more credibility. And then he says to me afterwards, he goes, yeah, and 77% of statistics are made up, including that one. Okay, Myrna, maybe you know what percentage of statistics are made up, I don't know, but certainly when you hear somebody quoting and you ask them, oh, where does it actually say that? You know, it's interesting to find out, okay. But studies do show that in people who emotionally regulate themselves in a healthy way, there's a very, very positive correlation between emotional regulation and depression management. People with lower levels of anxiety show higher emotional control and social emotional intelligence. It's no surprise, right? It's no surprise. The way that we feel and interpret our triggers or the things around us, our stimuli, affects how we think, how we decide, and how we coordinate our actions in our day-to-day lives. For example, a person who has poor emotion regulation strategies is more likely to fall prey to mood polarities. And his actions and behavioral patterns would always be at the mercy of his emotions. Okay, let me say that again in English for you, okay, because obviously I'm quoting from an article here. People who don't regulate their emotions properly, they tend to be more moody. Anybody surprised by that? No, of course not. That's pretty obvious, right? And therefore, at the mercy of their emotions. There was a young man, I don't want to say his name, because I'm about to make fun of him. There was a young man who had come for Rosh Hashanah on once or twice, and then he hadn't signed up for Rosh Hashanah the next year. So I called him up and I said, hey, Dave. His name is not Dave. We do have a David Saunders. I'm sure it wasn't him, okay? I said, hey, Dave, what's going on? I see you didn't sign up for Rosh Hashanah yet. He goes, well, I'm not really in the mood to come for Rosh Hashanah. That's what he said to me, okay? So I said to him, wow, you're a child. You're a child. You do things because you're in the mood to do them, or you're not in the mood to do them. Now, we're all children, aren't we? We're all of us will do or not do things because of our mood at times, right? But if you're doing it all the time, then you're really a child. Now, did I really tell him he's a child to his face or on the phone? Of course, I didn't say it like that. You all know that I'm a big believer in you can say almost anything to anyone. It just depends how you say it. So what I said to him was, I actually don't remember exactly what I said or how I said it, but I basically said to him, you can't make a decision about coming for the holidays based on your mood. You have to decide, is it the right thing or is it the wrong thing, and then make a decision about what you want to do. But you can't not go to shul because you're not in the mood to go to shul. That's not how it works. It's not how religion works. It's not how adults think and act. And he accepted it and he came for the first day. So when we emotionally regulate, it allows us to carefully judge effective outcomes and then decide, how we want to act and how we want to what we want to do, what we want to actually avoid. Okay. There's I need to give you your key back. Where is it? Okay, found the surface somewhere. Found the surface somewhere. Okay. All right. There's a concept. Gottman has a concept called flooding. We've talked about this in the past during these shiurim. Flooding is when when something triggers you and you have these hormones released in your brain, or these what's the right terminology? Not just hormones. You have, I don't know what they're called. These chemicals that are released in your brain, and you have the fight or flight response, and you lose the ability to think. Okay, I think probably we're all familiar with this. When you feel threatened, when you feel made fun of, when you feel bullied, when you feel disrespected, whenever whatever it is, right? Whatever it is that triggers you. So people can get flooded. Now, if you've been working on your midos for your entire life, it's less likely that you're going to get flooded. But couples who get flooded, the best thing they can do is walk away from each other. Now, walking away from each other is not might be stonewalling, which is a bad way to actually argue. So there are ways around that, which is basically saying, listen, I'm not in a place right now where I feel like I can have a discussion in a healthy way. I need to take some time. Can we please talk about this in 2 hours from now? And you schedule time, and then you can deal with it later at a later time. So that's a healthy person. But a person who's flooded will say things and do things that they will surely regret. I remember a Rebbe of mine once said, if you didn't mean it, then why did you say it? People say all the time, oh, I didn't mean it. I don't know. I don't really, looking back at that now and thinking about it as an adult, I don't know if I buy that 100%. I think that people do say things they don't mean when they're flooded. But 99% of things that you say that you don't mean, you wish you would not have said them. How can you avoid getting flooded in the first place? The answer, of course, is going to be emotion regulation. Chris Lee is a professor. He's an author of the book called Mentalligence. That's a made-up word. A new psychology of thinking. Learn what it takes to be more agile, mindful, and connected in today's world. So he says that with emotional regulation, we can allow the initial upsurge of emotion to settle down and zoom out of the situation before reacting to it. The increased time gap between stimulus and response restores the mental faculties that involve rational thinking and reasoning. And as a result, we can save ourselves from sudden emotional breakdowns or burnout. More than that, we could save ourselves from interactions that we regret. We could save ourselves from saying or doing things that we really don't mean. You all know my favorite quote from Viktor Frankl. Everyone here knows it, right? I think I've said at least shiurim a number of times already. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies a choice, and in that choice lies our growth and our freedom. That's what we're going for here, okay? And that's why people that emotionally regulate on a regular basis, so those people are able to allow themselves more space between stimulus and response. Anybody have any questions before I move on? I'm not looking at the chat here. I may have missed something. I don't see anybody has chatted anything yet. If anybody has any questions, we're going to talk about the most useful emotional regulation skills now, after this introduction of why emotional regulation is important. Okay, that's the second part. Okay, so part two. Any questions? Am I making sense? Okay, I have my live audience of one over here. Okay. She's my best critic. She always loves everything I say. It's amazing. Okay. Self-regulation. How do you go about doing this? So number one, we just said, it helps us pause between feeling and reacting. It encourages us to slow down for a bit and act a little more objectively and evaluate a situation before jumping right into it. But there's another aspect of it, which I forgot to mention, which is value engagement. Boy, that sounds like a big word, right? What does value engagement mean? Value engagement means that when we react impulsively without paying attention to our emotions, we can deviate from our core values. If you want to be really firm about it, you could say when you listen to Yetzer Hara, you go against your values. Yeah, of course, right? If you were to ask yourself, what do I really believe? What do I really value? Well, I value my relationships. Then why would you do something to sabotage it? Why would you do something to harm it? Why would you do something to insult a person who may have triggered you, but that's a person that you should care about the most in the world, and that's where your value is. So to be consistent with your core values, without being emotionally regulated, you could act in a way that is opposite to them. So by regulating your emotions, you can gain the power to stay calm under pressure and prevent yourself from acting against your core values and ethics. Okay, let's talk about skills. I missed the chat here. Let's see what you said. Somebody is suggesting that you have to know how to initiate the pause. Remember I told you that there should be a pause between stimulus and response? So this particular person said that she uses a pause. You can use like a button. Didn't Staples have this button that they sold for a while? A red button? Does anybody remember that? Staples had this red button. I remember, what did it say on the button? Press here? I don't know what it said on it, whatever it said, right? Yeah, so I think that was probably the idea, okay? Sure. I'm gonna share a little secret with you about myself, okay? I wonder if you know this. Actually, since congregants don't usually give feedback to rabbis, at least not the feedback we're interested in. We get all kinds of feedback. But I don't know if you know this, but I don't know if it's still true. When I first started as a rabbi, and certainly in Palo Alto in my first couple of years here probably, I had a very difficult time. Smiling when I spoke, because I was very focused on what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, and even if I rehearsed. And I used to rehearse my drushes when I would walk from Camden. I had a 25-minute walk. I wonder if I spoke longer then. But I used to rehearse my drushes, my sermons, Shabbos morning. And so I'd be more comfortable with the words. Now I have a much shorter walk, so I don't know if I rehearse in the same way. But I had a very hard time smiling when I spoke, because I was very, very focused on what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. So I asked Rabbi Marcus. He once came to give a talk. He's a Rebbe in Neve. He's a fantastic teacher. So I asked him about this, and he told me he has the same problem. And he said what he does is he takes his watch off of his left hand wrist and he puts it on his right wrist. And every time he talks a little bit with his hands, and every time he notices his right wrist, he's like, oh yeah, smile. So he's using a positive trigger. Okay, he's using a positive reminder. Okay, so number one, first skill, and we talked about this last week in depth. Self-awareness. Notice what you're feeling. Name it. Are you feeling sad, hopeless, ashamed, anxious? Right? Give yourself some options and explore your feelings and to name the specific emotion. Okay, all you need is the awareness of what am I feeling. So that's huge, because then you can decide what to do with it. Last week, somebody asked me a really amazing question, which is, I think Daphne asked me this amazing question, which was, why is it that when you can name it to tame it, when it comes to a negative feeling and you name it, it decreases the intensity of the emotion. But maybe when you name a positive feeling, it increases the emotion of the intensity. So I asked another therapist this question, and he had a great answer for me. And he said to me, he goes, you know how I have such a good answer for you on the spot? I was like, no. He said, somebody asked me this exact same question 5 weeks ago, and I thought about it, and this is what I came up with. And he said that because the whole idea of name it to tame it is the idea being that we're giving you control over the emotion. So when it's a negative emotion, you're controlling it and you're going to decrease it. But it's a positive emotion, you also have control over it. But because you're interested and you're motivated to increase the feeling, so that's why it's going to increase that feeling. So the naming it gives you the ownership of it, the control of it. By having control of it, you can decide what to do with it. So that's self-awareness piece. Somebody wrote that she recognizes a button, she labels the trigger, and she locates it on herself. I'm not sure exactly what she means, but I'm going to, before you tell me what you mean, okay, I'm going to tell you that that many people have what's called a somatic reaction. Have you heard that term before? Somatic means of the body. I know for myself that I have somatic reactions when I'm feeling upset about how an interaction went. I'll feel it in my stomach or in my neck or in my jaw, in my arms and my shoulders. I'll feel a physical sensation that's different than the emotion. So noticing what's going on in your body is a big part of self-awareness. Because if you can, sometimes I'll notice something somatically, and then I'll ask myself, hold on, why do I have that sensation? And then if I can identify something that went along with it, I'll notice the feeling. And by becoming aware of that feeling, I can let go of it. Right? So sometimes the starting point of awareness is the somatic awareness. I don't know if that's what you meant, but I'm glad you brought it up because it's a very important point. Okay. Number 2, mindful awareness. A number of years ago, we gave a whole shiur on mindfulness. Probably we should do it again. Maybe we'll do it next week. Mindfulness is a huge topic, a very important topic. My mother tells me that Jewish Action has a review on a new book about mindfulness, probably the one that I mentioned to you by Rabbi Eitan Feiner's brother who wrote it, about tefillah. I imagine that's the one that she meant. I didn't get a chance to look at it yet. Mindfulness is basically the idea being that you can explore and identify aspects of your external world, your body, what you're thinking, what you're feeling to help you, and obviously all those things bring you to self-awareness. So mindfulness is certainly tremendous, and I think probably we'll spend some time on it next week. Okay. For the next one, I want to do a little bit of an exercise, just for yourself. Okay, make sure you have a pen and paper or a phone or something that you can write with. Okay. So this one is officially called cognitive reappraisal. So what do you think that means? Cognitive means of the mind, of what you're thinking. Reappraisal is to rethink something. It's kind of similar to what we call reframing in therapy. Okay, maybe you're familiar with the term reframing. So what does it do? It alters the way that you think about something. Those of you that are familiar with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or DBT, anger management, right? All those things require greater flexibility and acceptance. So these include things like thought replacement or situational role reversal, which is what the Mishnah basically says. Don't judge your friend until you're in his shoes. You can't really be in his shoes, but first at least try to be in his shoes and then try to judge him favorably. You try to look at a stressful situation from a whole new perspective. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and then I want you to do this for yourself. For example, my boss hates me. Or you can say something, or I'm not needed here. Or you can say something like, my boss is upset at this moment. I'm sure I can make up for this. Or I know I'm hardworking and honest. Let me give it another try. So what you do is you gain a broader and better perception of your problem, and you react to them with more positivity. So think of some sort of a negative thought that you have either about yourself or about your situation, and see if you can reframe it or reappraise it and replace that thought with a positive thought. You can write down the negative thought and the positive thought. I'm going to try to do it myself as well. Okay, so let's take a moment to do that. Okay, I have one that comes to mind, and I'll share it with you in a moment if you give me a thumbs up, let me know that you're ready to move on, okay? In the reaction button at the bottom, you can give me a thumbs up. If you're ready to move on from the exercise, please let me know. I want to give you enough time to do it, and at the same time not bore you. Okay, can you give me a thumbs up? People are ready to move on? Want to give me a physical thumbs up? Okay, fine. I know for myself, and this might make me sound very holy. I'm not very holy. If Tehila's giving me a hard time, everyone here knows that we have a daughter with significant special needs. Tehila's giving me a hard time. So I can think to myself negatively, like, I can't take this, or I might think to myself something like, I don't know how much more of this I can handle. Right? Those are some natural thoughts that might come to mind. So what's the thought replacement? What does she need right now that I can help her with, if anything? Maybe she's hungry, maybe there's something wrong, maybe there's something that she needs. So instead of getting to a down negative place, I get to a productive place. That might be one positive thought that I can replace the negative one with. Maybe I can replace it with, this is an opportunity for growth. Hashem is giving me a nisayon. Hashem is testing me and enabling me to be, more patient. Let me view this as a opportunity for growth in my midos. Something like that. The idea is to take the negative thought and to replace it. And what that does, of course, is obviously you're going to feel much better about a situation that is very difficult, or someone is very difficult, and help you manage it. Does that make sense? Okay. Do you have anyone in your life who's so positive that they're constantly reframing things positively that you're just like tired of them? Okay. We should all have people like that in our life. Okay, those are wonderful people. Okay. Okay, number 4, adaptability. So when people are emotionally dysregulated, obviously they're not going to adapt easily to life changes. They'll become more prone to distraction. They won't really have coping mechanisms. That's why a lot of people resist change, right? I'm not talking about people who have a fear or a phobia of change. I know someone who has a phobia of change. It's to the extent that he becomes extremely stressed out in new situations. It's not a social phobia, but it's a phobia of change. When he needed new shoes, he got himself the same exact shoes that he had before, just obviously new ones. When he needed new glasses, he got himself the same pair of glasses that he previously had, just new lenses, right? Or new frames, but they're the exact same ones that he had. When he needed a new car, he somehow found the exact same model car with just fewer miles on it, okay? This is a gentleman who does not like change. We're not talking about that. But we're talking about people that just resist. We're resisting change because we can't cope. Because we can't cope. So a great exercise to build adaptability, to become more adaptive, is objective evaluation. For example, when you feel bogged down by stressful emotions that you want to avoid, you may end up destructively reacting to them. Okay? In other words, you're already in a bad place, right? I'm not talking about where you reacted against somebody else, but like life is difficult for whatever reason, maybe COVID, maybe something else, and you're already in a challenging place, and you're doing things that are not aligned with your values, let's say, okay? You're sitting and watching television for 12 hours a day, or playing video games for 14 hours a day, or I don't know, reading blogs online about religious Judaism, right? There's a lot of negative things you can do with your life, okay? The last one might be worse than the first two, okay? And things that are not in sync with your values. So you need to adapt. So what can you do to adapt so you can become more emotionally regulated is objective evaluation. So how do you objectively evaluate when you are subjective. You're in the situation. The Gemara tells us, Adam karov eitel atzmo, which is that a person can't testify about himself because he's related to himself. Moshe and Aaron are Achim, are brothers. Moshe and Aaron are brothers, and one is not allowed to testify about the other one because you can't see straight about yourself because you have what's called subjectivity. You're not objective about yourself and about your situation. Okay? You're not. It's impossible to be fully objective about yourself, and therefore you don't even experience truth. There's an amazing episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show. I think it's called The Walls Have Ears or something like that. I have to look it up. I always forget what it's called. And it's an amazing episode. And I recommend it to couples. My father-in-law says, he's the one who recommended it to me, every rabbi and every therapist should see this. What happens in the opening scene is the husband comes in and he hops over, he does his signature move, right? He hops over the couch or the ottoman, and he hangs up his coat. He smiles at his wife. He gives her a kiss, hello, and he's like the greatest guy in the world. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's not the opening scene. That's his version of it. Okay, the opening scene is he smiles at her, but he doesn't really put his coat over a chair, whatever it is. Okay, and they have this kind of small sort of an argument. They're both at fault. Okay, in the opening scene. In the second scene, he's talking to his friends at the water cooler at work the next day, and he says, you know what happened last night? And basically they reenact the initial scene, but this time everything he does is beautiful and perfect, and everything his wife does is terrible. Okay? And then they go to commercial break, and then once again then the wife is talking to her friend on the phone. Remember the rotary phones with the long cord stretching all the way across the kitchen? Remember those guys? Okay, and she's talking on the phone, and once it fades to black, and then again he walks in the front door. And this time he's a total jerk, and she's the biggest tzaddikus in the world. Okay? So which one is emes? He doesn't know the emes, she doesn't know the emes. Neither one knows the truth. And that's the way it works, because people are not objective, and they cannot evaluate their own behavior objectively. So how do you evaluate your behavior objectively? Again, we're not talking about when it's an interpersonal reaction necessarily, but just in general, how do you evaluate yourself to make sure that you're in sync with your values? So one way of doing it is ask yourself, what if your best friend was experiencing the same thing? What would you suggest to your best friend to do under these circumstances? And write down those answers. And then ask yourself if you're following those same steps for yourself. So let's see if you can turn that into a little activity, okay? Is there anything that you're doing in your life that doesn't really sync with your values? And you're blaming it on some situation, some trigger, some difficulty. Okay? That's my question, my challenge for you. And if there is some difficulty, some challenge, and as a result, you're doing something with your life that you don't, maybe you're not eating healthy, maybe you're watching too much TV, maybe you're ignoring your spouse, maybe you're sleeping in, I don't know, maybe you're not davening with kavanah. That's up for you to decide what it is, okay? And now you have the tools now to know, like, okay, what's triggering it, right? I know that when I have anxiety, I know that I just want to sit and, watch clips on YouTube, let's say, right? Well, you can get lost in the quagmire of YouTube, One video leads to another. Is that in sync with my values and how I'm using time? Of course not. So ask yourself this question. Is there anything you're doing that doesn't really match up with your values in terms of, and if obviously you have to know what your values are. And you can always do a value sort to figure what those are, and that's an activity by itself. But is there anything that's like not true to who you are? And ask yourself what's triggering it. And then go ahead and ask yourself, what if your best friend was experiencing the same thing? What would you suggest to him or to her under the same circumstances? And write down those answers and ask yourself, are those the things that you're doing? So that's a way to adapt, to emotionally regulate yourself when you're already dysregulated. So once again, when you're done with that, just give me a thumbs up with the reactions and let me know that you're ready to move on. This is a bit of a more challenging sort of an exercise. Are you doing the exercise? Should be. Okay, you get the line. That's good. That's the start. I know this particular exercise is a little bit harder than the other ones. Okay, you ready to move on? Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to move on. Okay, we have a couple people. Let's give you 1 more minute here. Okay. Okay, good. Number 5. This one is going to sound very 2020. Self-compassion. Yeah. By the way, somebody's mentioning to me that it's very hard to do this, but it's a very good step to step outside yourself to your friend's view. Just to add a little Torah to tonight, I think Rabbi Yonah and Mr. Sharm, they both talk about why does the Mishnah say Knei Lecha Chaver? Why do you have to have good friends? The answer is because good friends see you objectively, and if a good friend can tell you how it is. I have one very close friend, and whenever I'm doubting myself about my behavior or anything like that, I'll call him up and I'll ask him what he thinks, and he'll tell me what he thinks because he has the objective perspective, and I think it's such a bracha that I have that. Okay, it's such a bracha that I have that. I have a friend who can be objective, and that's really how the Sfarim explain why the Mishnah, it says in Pirkei Avos, why having a friend is so special and so important, even more important than having a Rav. Because the Mishnah says, Asei lecha Rav, make for yourself a rabbi, which means invest in a relationship, right? Do everything you can. But if a friend is more important, you should buy. Expend money, not just time and energy. Okay, number 5, self-compassion. Setting aside some time for yourself every day is a great way to build emotional regulation skills. Reminding yourselves of your talents, of your virtues, good things that you've done with your life. Letting your mind land on a flexible space can change the way you feel and react to your emotions. So positive self-affirmations. I would say that the firm way to say that is, well, gratitude journaling is related. During Modim, just think about how grateful you are for not just the things Hashem has given you in terms of physical things, monetary things, but family, talent, ability, place in life, position. There's so much to be grateful and thankful for. And when you focus and meditate on those sorts of things, it gives you some emotional bandwidth. It gives you some energy that you need. Relaxation and breath control, that goes back a little bit to mindfulness. Maybe doing some yoga. Gratitude journaling, we just mentioned that. So those are some things that are all kind of related to each other. Something came to mind here I wanted to mention. Oh, I can't remember what it is. I guess it wasn't that good or that important. I recently was involved with a story, horrible story, of a young woman who lost her life at a very young age, in a traumatic, tragic way. And her father wrote me this beautiful message. I was pretty helpful, and I was involved with the coroner. It was a messy, horrible case just last week. Not related to our shul, but just a friend. I was a friend of a friend, so he called me up and asked me for help because I happened to be here locally. And he wrote such a beautiful note to me last night. He wasn't writing it to me as much as he was sharing his thoughts and his feelings. And I want to share with you what I wrote back to him. And those of you that teach, we'll talk about that, or those, I'll give you a sense as well. Something else that you can do that's kind of similar. I wrote, what you wrote is beautiful and inspiring. Thank you. I encourage you, if I may, to save it in your notes on your phone. You can look back at it from time to time, especially when you feel differently, and it can give you the chizuk that you'll need. Okay? My father, I don't know if my mother still has them or not. My wife and I, we both have, obviously, the cards and the letters and the notes we've written to each other. But we also have thank you notes from the students and their parents. And sometimes, sometimes you come out of the classroom, you're like, I'm a useless teacher. I didn't teach anything today. And I got upset, whatever. Who knows how you feel about yourself. So what you can do to help yourself is read some of those, remind yourselves of some of those positive interactions that you've had and meaningful moments where people just responded really well. And if you have those kinds of thank you notes from people, to keep them and to read them, those can be good too as well. I want to come back to emotional bandwidth in a moment. Emotional support. You can reach outside to yourself, to your friend, to your spouse, to your therapist, to whomever. When you're having trouble with inner coping and you need some extra support for coping, that would be a time for you to reach out to others. Obviously, that's going to be, so that's number 6, emotional support. So just to review them: self-awareness, mindfulness or mindful awareness, cognitive reappraisal, adaptability, self-compassion or self-care, and emotional support. Okay, the last one I'll bring up, which is one of the things that have been studied pretty extensively from a scientific perspective, is attentional control. Attentional control starts with reappraisal, which we already talked about. And what it does is it aims to divert our attention away from the negative emotion and allows us to look at it from a rewarding perspective. For example, we can overpower the irresistible anger and shame that follows an insult or abuse from someone by thinking of it as a lesson that taught you to avoid building connections with rude people. So here, it's a little bit slightly different than what we said before. By focusing more on what you learned from the conflict, you not only save yourself from severe stress and agony, but you also gain a perspective how you can avoid such interpersonal disputes later. And as a result, you're successful in modulating your responses to the negative encounter and restoring your mental peace altogether. I want to end with one final idea. That's called, that one is called attentional control. Okay. It's related to reappraisal. Okay. I want to mention one final thing, which is something that I may have spoken about in the past, which is, I think there's something called emotional bandwidth. And what we're doing by regulating our emotions is we're giving ourselves more emotional bandwidth. What do I mean by bandwidth? Bandwidth is a Palo Alto term. Okay, we lived in Silicon Valley for a number of years, and people talk about, oh, I have no more bandwidth. People would talk like that. They would use that as a metaphor, but it became part of their speech. I'm too busy. I have no more bandwidth. I've got too many projects I'm working on. I have no more bandwidth. What's bandwidth? Bandwidth, of course, is you have a wire that carries the internet into your house, and Spectrum promises to give you X amount of megabytes per second of download, upload, whatever it is, right? And that's bandwidth. So you're limited by, I'm not a technology person, but you're limited by the actual physical wiring, and then of course the receiver, and then the giver, so whatever that's called. So you have all these limitations based on what they call bandwidth, which is the ability of how much information is going through that cable, that wire in that moment. A hose has a limited amount of bandwidth, right? So your shower head has a limited amount of bandwidth or space for the water to come through. And the less space there is, the harder the pressure is going to be. So think about it like that. We as human beings, we have emotional bandwidth. There are times we have more, there are times we have less. When you've had a good night's sleep, and you've had a good breakfast, and you ate healthy, and you're feeling good about yourself, and you had a lovely date the night before with a friend or a spouse or whatever it is. So that's when you're in a place of emotional relaxation. Even the guy that cuts you off in traffic is not going to impact you. Okay? Even road rage you won't experience. Well, you're not going to at least feel the road rage yourself. Okay? As opposed to, you did not have a good night's sleep. You did not have a healthy breakfast. You feasted on Danishes and chocolate bars for breakfast, and you got into a fight with your spouse. And now you're feeling really badly and poorly about yourself. So here you are in a place where you have no emotional bandwidth. And then come along somebody to trigger you. You think you're going to react? Of course you're going to react. So regulating your emotions is making sure that you could keep your bandwidth wide open. That's what you're really going for. And that's really the goal of regulating your emotions from my perspective. And by having that emotional balance, so then that gives you the chance, the opportunity to have a space between stimulus and response. It enables you to be a person that you want to be, that's in sync with your values. And tonight we shared many of the key qualities and practices that are critical to making sure and to enabling yourself to be that person who has a lot of emotional bandwidth and is going to be the person that is someone that people want to hang out with. I thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was part 2 of regulating emotion. I think next week maybe we'll talk about mindfulness in depth, and we'll have a lot more Torah sources as well. Okay, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for listening. Yasher koach, okay? All right. Laila Tov, everybody.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Sorry.
No problem, Michal. I will send you the YouTube link so you could see the beginning of the class.
Amazing. Thanks. I don't know what happened, but once I reinstalled